to you.
You're right in the way. Just like that's like wrong.
Yes.
Close. Bigger room. So tight. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Good. What was your name? Lana. Very nice to meet you. Yeah, how are you?
I saw it.
No, she's working with the baby. Yes, he's here. Oh, he's so cute. That curly hair. Should be a fun dinner.
Good to see you.
Hey, Mike. How you doing? McShann, how are you doing? Howdy. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, with our Facebook. I'm just sharing.
Maybe you'll send us the link or whatever. We can also just excuse me.
In the timber, both us and the timber shows.
And you'll be rotating
Oh, you're waiting for her? I know. I said no, I can't go back without it.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. If you could please have a seat. We're going to go ahead and start very, very shortly. Again, good evening. It's a pleasure to welcome each and every single one of you here today, here at the Chamber of Commerce. My name is Javier De Leon, and I'm the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and we want to welcome you this evening to this very important event. We are extremely excited. You know, when Giovanni called and says, can we partner together and have the forum over here in Harlingen? I said yes in a heartbeat. And the reason I said yes is because I think Harlingen, no offense to other cities that are here, but Harlingen is one of the best cities in the state, and we're really excited about it. We're really excited about having this forum over here, and again, all the candidates. We want to welcome you. We want to thank you, and we're humbled that you're here today. So I know you're going to be doing an extremely great job. The community is excited about hearing the great things that that you envision for this great South Texas and the state of Texas. And so we want to welcome each and every single one of you. And again, this is your home. Thank you. I'm very, very fortunate. I know almost every single one of you, and I can tell you, every single one of you are just amazing individuals. So again, thank you for being here. And community, thank you for being here. I know it's kind of cool. It's a little bit ugly weather, not for me. I love this type of weather, but for you to be here, Ron likes it too. It's beautiful weather, but more importantly, you being here just shows that you're serious about the community. You're serious about what's happening in local politics and what's happening not only in Harlingen but this whole region. So again, I want to thank each and every single one for being here. I'm confident that you're going to have a great eye-opener with this great candidate saying some things. And I also want to mention that we have some nice sandwiches that were donated by Javier Segura from the Harlingen Convention Center. So Javier, thank you very much for providing those sandwiches. I'm going to take about 3 or 4 in a minute and come go to the back. So again, thank you, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Giovanni for Raise Your Hand Texas. So Giovanni, it's all yours.
I'll send it to you.
I'd also like to welcome everyone. My name is Giovanni Escobedo from Raise Your Hand Texas. I am the South Texas Regional Director, and I'm honored to cover the area. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's forum for the future on public education. Raise Your Hand Texas is excited to welcome you and the community and the candidates to have a conversation on public education. We believe that the topics that we are going to cover tonight are extremely important for our students, for our teachers, for our parents, and our community. So with that, I want to go ahead and read the rules for the candidates in the audience. For our candidates, we ask that you respond directly to the content matter in question, to direct your answers to the moderator, and do not engage your opponents. Do not call your opponents by name or make no notice of their voting records, previous statements, or anything related to them. We are here to hear your take on public education, not your take on your opponents. Do not interrupt your fellow candidates when they are responding to each question. And tonight we have allocated 2 minutes for each question. We have a timekeeper in the front. When you have 30 seconds you'll raise the yellow card, then when your time is up, you'll raise the red card. At the end, you also have time for opening statements and closing statements, all of them for 2 minutes. And for the audience, we ask that you maintain an atmosphere of respect. Please refrain from applauding or making any noise of approval or disapproval after a candidate has responded to a question. At the end, we can all thank you for being here tonight. So please don't make any noise. Do not attempt to distribute campaign materials in this room. We have a table outside at the end to candidates, and you all can engage in that. And if you hear something tonight that you find interesting, do you want to tweet? We welcome your tweets or your messages on Facebook. In the agenda that was in your chairs, there's the hashtags, and you want to follow us at the bottom. At Raise Your Hand Texas, and Raise Your Hand Texas _ is South Texas. And with that, I think I'd like to welcome our moderator for tonight, which is Mr. George McShan, to the podium. So he can introduce himself and also start with the candidate work. George.
Thank you, Giovanni, and good evening. I'm George McShan, and I'm deeply honored to moderate this Future Candidates Forum for District 27. Let me take a moment to... Yes,
I went to the candidate. When you want to respond, please turn your microphone, and to turn it on when you want to respond, turn it off after you're done.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let me introduce myself to you. I'm George McShan, and I'm deeply honored to be here and moderate this forum. I'm a lifelong educator. I started my teaching career as a high school science teacher in Brownsville High School. It was the late 60s, that's all I'll say. And I moved to Texas State Technical College. And I had a career of almost 32 years. I retired. But during that time, I was on the faculty, and I served as dean of the College for Instruction and Workforce Training for 20 years. And public service called. Obviously, our children in schools here. I was involved in PTA and coaching Little League and doing Harlingen Boys Club, and I decided to seek public election. I was elected to the Harlingen School Board in 1988. And 30 years later, I retired. Served 30 years on the board, Harlingen CISD. During my tenure on the school board, I was blessed to serve at the local, state, and national level in leadership capacity. In 1998, I was elected and served as president of the Texas Association of School Boards. In 2004, I was elected and served as president of the National School Board Association of the United States. So then, after that, I joined a partnership with the national search firm for superintendents and did superintendent searches in Texas and throughout the nation. And now I'm an independent search consultant, provide not just superintendent searches, but I do governance training and leadership for school boards and superintendents throughout the district and throughout the state. And let me share with you that it's important to have the public involved in public education. When we look at this, we look at the fact that public education, because the Texas Constitution allows us to have freedom and liberty and a voice for the people. Also, it gives us a sense of community, equality, and obviously prosperity, which we all strive for in this great democracy. With that being said, let's get started. What we want to do first is have each of you introduce yourselves, and we will start with Ms. Margaret LaMantia. Please take up to 2 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us about you and your family's experience in Texas public schools. Ms. LaMantia.
Hi, I'm Morgan LaMantia, and I'm running for State Senate for 27. I'm a lawyer and a businesswoman, and I'm running because I think it's time for the next generation to pick up the torch. I'm running because there's so much love about this community, but we know it has its difficulties, like healthcare. We need to be more accessible, more affordable. economic development, we need to have an economy with higher paying jobs and education. We need to make sure we fully fund our public schools and raise our teacher salaries. I'm a native of South Texas and come from a strong South Texas family. My grandfather was the first one of us to come down here, and he came down without finishing high school. But he understood the importance of education, and as he built his business, he continued to give back to the community. And so 20 years ago, he started a scholarship program called STARS, and since then, we've been able to put college within reach for over 17,000 students, because we've always known that education is one of the best investments we can make in our communities. And when we talk about healthcare, when we talk about education, and we talk about economic development, what we're really talking about are our families down here. We need to make sure everyone has the opportunity to take care of their families and have their families grow into the strong South Texas families that are the backbone of this community. You know, this district truly is the future of Texas, and if we educate our students and we train our workforce and we make the strategic investments, we can build the type of economy that can help and create these high-paying jobs. All we need to do is focus on our families and help them grow. So thank you so much, and I look forward to answering the questions.
And thank you so much, Ms. LaMantia. This time, I'm going to ask State Representative Alex Dominguez. Please take up to 2 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us about you and your family's experience in public education.
Well, thank you. So, I'm a husband and I'm a father of a 3-year-old boy who loves books, and especially Curious George, which I have to read about 5 to 6 stories every night before he'll consider thinking about going to sleep. I live in Brownsville. I've been the state representative now for 4 years. Before that, I was a county commissioner for 4.5 years as well. I've been an attorney now in this state since 2003. I consider the Valley my home. And it wasn't all that long ago that I would spend quite a bit of time here in Harlingen, because I grew up just down the road from La Feria. I didn't have a car at the time, so I'd ride my bike to Harlingen. A great exercise. Do not do it if you don't have to. Driving is great. I'm a product of public education. I have never attended a private school. In fact, I'm a first-generation high school graduate in my family. My dad finished the 4th grade, my mom the 6th. So at the time, when we were growing up, my parents just wanted us to graduate from high school. That was an accomplishment, and that would guarantee you a good job, a future. You can always join the military. Well, it's been too long that we've been thinking that way. And I'll tell you something. Statistically, we find that where you were born, what school district you are born into, will many times determine what your future is going to be. That's why public education is important to me. I want to make sure that all of our public schools are not just adequate, that they're exceptional, so that people think about moving to Texas for their education, which involves a great deal of investment. Back in the 86th session, I was a co-author of House Bill 3, which began to pave the road for really investing in our public schools. We haven't done enough, but as your state senator, I want to do more, because I believe that our public schools really hold the key to giving our students, our children, the chance for a bright future. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Dominguez. And now, Ms. Sara Stapleton-Barrera, please take up to 2 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us about you and your family's experience with Texas public schools.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you everyone for attending. It's nice to see some familiar faces, even someone that I started 1st grade with in Brownsville. My name is Sara Stapleton-Barrera, and I'm an attorney from Brownsville, practicing mostly indigent and constitutional work. I'm a mom, I've got 3 little kids, and I'm the founder of South Texans for Term Limits. And I'm really excited to be here. I sort of started my journey back in 2020 when I ran against Senator Lucio, and it was an eye-opening experience for me. I did a lot of research on his voting record and learned that time and time again he would vote against public schools and would vote in favor of the voucher system. And so that sort of kick-started my idea to run. And at the time, people thought I was, a little bit naive, because I wasn't a politician. I was, had 3 kids, and I didn't have millions of dollars. And I jumped into this political race against the 2nd most senior senator in the state with millions of dollars and a ton of people at his beck and call. But somebody had to stand up for the teachers, and it just wasn't happening. And we ran this really, really tight race, came really close. And that's why I'm here, to continue on this journey, right? My mom's a teacher, my sister's a teacher, I was a teacher at one point in my life, and it didn't last long because it was the hardest job I have ever had.
Yeah.
You're underworked, you're overpaid. Keep in mind, I've had some really hard jobs. I've worked at the Subway sandwich shop, I've worked as a camp counselor, but teacher was the hardest. And I am convinced the teacher pay has to raise immediately. We're in this pandemic, and I think that we're in a position where people are suffering. I mean, how many educators do we have in this room right now? All right, so we got our main man right here. So we know that this is where our attention needs to be in the next legislative session. I have vowed to never take funding from pro-charter school groups, and that's what we need. Otherwise, we will not go forward. When I ran in 2020, after that race, I had women, mostly young women.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you so very
Sorry.
much. Thank you, Ms. Stapleton-Barrera. Thank you very much. Mr. Salomon Torres, please take up to 2 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us about you and your family's experience with Texas Public Schools.
Thank you, George. Good evening, everybody. I am very happy to be with you this evening. This topic of education is one of my favorite ones because there's a common saying that education is an equalizer if you do it right. Well, many times we don't do it right. In Texas, we don't totally do it right, as we have seen the funding levels not keep up with the actual needs in our school districts. I call it more of an uplifter. If you do it right, it's going to lift the lives of families, of the students, and really their generation. In my case, I have 4 children in public schools here in Harlingen. One of them is here, my freshman son Joaquin, who attends early collegiate high school. The other 2 are in middle school, and 1 is in elementary school. Of course, they're home doing homework with their mother-in-law. My wife is here, Yvette, who is one of my best advisors in this issue as well. And I will tell you this, my sister who's here, Blanca, she and I have actually been able to compare school districts because of our life experience. We were farm workers all of our lives, from the age of 5 up until 18. We saw school districts, public school districts, and we were in public school districts in Wisconsin where we were allowed to attend, where we were probably 2 or 3 of the only Mexican Americans in the entire student body. To feel that experience, come down here where you are the majority, it gives a shake. You shake as a kid and you wonder, why are these disparities in wealth? Why are these disparities in how kids learn? You grow up with that kind of realization and you know you want to do something about it. And that's why I'm running for the Texas Senate. I've seen enough of the deficiencies in our public school system, and I'm here to partner with you, with every single one of you, from whatever corner of our society you represent, to make public schools in Texas the best that they can be, not ranked number 35, but rank in the top 5 if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. Now we will begin with our statewide candidate questions. I will alternate posing questions among our candidates. They will have 2 minutes each to respond. Our first question relates to learning loss and the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic created massive challenges in our public schools. The rapid shift to remote learning, student enrollment decline, academic learning loss, social and emotional needs, and teacher and staffing shortages will have an impact on our schools for years to come. What should the state's role be in helping schools meet this challenge? Representative Dominguez, will you start us off?
Certainly, thank you. My wife's an educator, and a lot of people that I know in Brownsville are educators. Clearly, because in South Texas, Brownsville Independent School District is the largest employer south of San Antonio. So a lot of people we know are educators. And I asked them, how are things going during COVID? This is before session. And they said, every school is different. In some schools, they received the support from their administrators that they needed. A few schools, some parents had a problem. Some were terrified of bringing their kids to class. Some wanted to bring their kids to class. having lived in captivity in 2020 or so, when we didn't know what the pandemic was and what it would look like, really posed lots of challenges for everyone. But the pandemic isn't going away, and it might happen, it might come back to us. So we need to have a better solution than what we have currently. The way we do that is by investing in our schools, empowering TEA to be more responsive to individual school districts, and more importantly, by investing in the things that our educators, our teachers, our teacher assistants need. That means expanding broadband internet in all of our schools and in their homes. Additionally, the state needs to invest in technology to make sure that every student has access to learning, both in school and at home. The reason why is some school districts in this state are better off. South Texas isn't going to compete with a Westlake school district. They're going to have plenty of money, either in the school district or at home from their own private funds. So we need to do more things like that. Additionally, we need to pass laws that allow our educators the flexibility to address and teach our students in a manner that's best for those students. These are all things within the power of the state legislature and the state senate. This last session, we saw our governor trying to fight against these. We need to work with him by bringing in subject matter experts in education. Bring them and all stakeholders to the table so that we can work a solution that works together.
Thank you, Representative Dominguez. Ms. Sara Barrera. Ms. Sara Stapleton-Barrera, your response.
Yeah, so it's clear to me that we have to just trust our teachers, right? There's so much trust that is lost, and they're left sort of scrambling for what's right for their students, but they don't have the authority to make the decisions. Meanwhile, our state leaders are sort of playing this waiting game, right? Sitting back and not really making the decisions. What they need to do is they allow the school districts to use the protocols that work. Our needs here are going to be completely different than the needs of a school district up in North Texas. So we can't have a blanket uniform ideal, by our governor, by one person. It's got to be, we've got to allocate to our teachers and let them make these decisions. Teachers are leaving, right? We know that there's this mass exodus. Kids are suffering through this triage instruction because of the teachers leaving. They're sending the kids to the gym, putting everyone in there. They're having English certified teachers having to teach math because they don't have enough teachers in order for instruction. So what do? The answer's simple, right? And it's just such a simple answer. And if it's been neglected for so long, we just invest. Texas is number 43 out of 50 states regarding our funding to our teachers. 43. I mean, the proof is in the pudding, right? And that's where it is. We're not investing. That's why our teachers are leaving. We up the teacher pay to $60,000 for starting teachers and give our more senior teachers better pay. We give them better retirements. I mean, this is our future, and we're skimping on it. And we've been skimping on it all this time. We prohibit these school choice schemes, and we invest and we elect leaders that understands how that works, value our teachers, and just let them teach.
Thank you, Ms. Stapleton-Barrera. Mr. Torres, your response.
Without a doubt, pay has to get rectified. It's embarrassing that we rank so low in pay rates in Texas, but it is beyond the issue of pay. If you ask a teacher, how is it going, pre-COVID, post-COVID, during COVID, you're gonna get a very common answer. And actually, I consulted my internal council of educators in my family, which are teachers in different cities in Texas, because I've got a big family. And it was a common answer, which is the teachers are being asked to fill the gaps on their own. When they need specialists in one expert subject matter or the other, they're expected to swim on their own. Find a way to fill the gaps in learning that the kids have experienced because of pandemic. If they ask for assistance, the answer is always no. If they get asked for special materials as learning tools, the answer is no. It's not in the budget. So with that kind of reaction, that kind of treatment, no wonder teachers are contemplating moving on to other professions or other states. There are what I would call the non-academic factors. Are teachers also expected to be social workers, which they are? Are they expected to be the IT experts, which they are? Yet none of these extra roles that they're being asked to fill are being compensated. They're expected to find the resources on their own. So to me, the last legislative session, which happened during the pandemic, was a huge failure in not assessing correctly with teachers, what do you need? We know that you're dealing with a very historic problem here of a health epidemic, but the legislature failed. They failed to put new initiatives in place that would fill these gaps that we're forcing our teachers to fill on their own without full support. So that's an area that for me is the state's role.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. Ms. LaMantia, your response.
First, I would like to take a second to thank all of our teachers. Our teachers went above and beyond during the pandemic. They switched their learning and their teaching methods on a dime to teach with new technologies, and they went above and beyond to help those kids that were trapped within the digital divide. Learning loss is a real issue, but it could have been so much worse if it wasn't for the dedication and professionalism of our teachers and how they didn't just go out and try to teach the kids, but also touch and brought parents into the learning environment as well. You know, I've spoken to a lot of teachers and I've heard what they're going through. We're seeing a lot of social, emotional learning issues that are coming up, especially in the younger ages. First graders are coming in with the social skills of kindergartners, but we're seeing that in the older ages as well. And so we need to support those social, emotional learning initiatives and curriculums. We need to appreciate the importance of counselors. And we need to partner with programs like Communities in Schools that help students, help them with the issues that they have outside of school, so that when they do come to class, they have the ability to focus on their education, and our teachers have the skills that they need to be able to address those social issues, but also help ensure that every kid can succeed. But we can't address learning loss without first addressing the retention and recruitment of teachers. We're seeing it everywhere. Teachers are retiring earlier. We have a shortage of substitutes. We have one of the lowest amount of students graduating and wanting to become teachers right now. And even before the pandemic, next to parental involvement, it was the quality of the teacher that really ensured a student's success. And so we need to get behind our teachers, support them, and make sure that we can retain and keep those teachers and really grow that teacher pipeline that's coming through. Because our very economic competitiveness, not just in this district, but across this entire state, depends on an educated workforce. And education, teacher burnout, and learning loss have to be the top of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaMantia. Our second question is about teacher workforce. Teachers, principals, and school staff are currently leaving the education profession in alarming numbers. Working conditions, pay, and other job opportunities are all factors helping attract and retain highly effective teachers. Are we paying our teachers what they are worth? And did the legislature do enough in the 2021 session to keep teachers in the profession? Ms. Stapleton-Barrera, your thoughts?
I mean, absolutely not. Back in 2020, I made a public call to action to Governor Abbott. I wrote letters, I made videos, did everything that I knew how to do to yell and scream and say, we need to raise teacher pay to $60,000 right now. And let's just imagine together, what if that would have happened? What if my efforts would have worked? And what if right now, in that legislative session, every starting teacher got $60,000? Would we be in this mess that we're in now? This mass exodus, people leaving, people feeling undervalued? I mean, it's something to look at and something to think about, right? So yeah, absolutely not. What do we need to do? Increase their salary? I mean, I have a list of stuff that could happen, and I will, pledge to fight for it to happen. We need to retain their retirement benefits. We need less costly renewal of certification. We need new teacher support and instruction. That first year when I was teaching, I cannot tell you how many times I went home from work crying, right? Just because I didn't know what I was doing. It was a challenge without the support that, without the support that a new teacher was needing. We need to forgive some student loans. We need to work on the conditions, including school leadership, professional collaboration, and shared decision-making. I think if teachers felt like they were involved in the decision-making process, then that would be a huge boost of morale that they're so desperately needing. That's where we start, right?
Thank you, Ms. Stapleton-Barrera. Mr. Torres, your response.
The average pay for teachers in the U.S. is $63,645. And I share the #1 ranked state, not to encourage our teachers to move there, but because it's just a fact. Pennsylvania is #1 at $70,258. Texas is number 35 at $57,091. And since 2010, the rate of pay has decreased by 0.33 in Texas. These numbers are nothing to brag about as far as how we prioritize funding for our teachers. We had a pandemic that resulted in teachers filling in the gaps, as I mentioned in my previous response. And even with that, there was no adjustment in the permanent pay scales that are enforced here in Texas. Even that wasn't enough to push our legislators to collectively, from both parties, come together with a bipartisan plan to increase these pay raises. And basically pointing the finger at the school districts. You all find a way to pay these teachers that are doing what they can do to deal with learning loss and deal with all the adjustments in our population. That situation sends a bad signal to our teachers. It sends a signal to them that we're not going to invest in you, therefore you're open. It's an open market for you to go and look at your opportunities. That's the bad signal. We should send a signal to them that they are the heart and soul of a school district as far as the role that they play in educating our children, and we should treat them that way. If they need assistance through personnel, we should be very creative in hiring personnel to assist them. If there's professionals in other fields like lawyers or accountants or retired business people who come in and provide support for the classroom in different specialty areas, we should do that. That's an opportunity. It's not an obstacle, it's an opportunity to increase the exposure of students to other specialists in whatever areas they need help. Math, if you need more tutors in math, let's recruit them from the manufacturing companies, from our engineering firms. We have really sharp people there who are good math students that can contribute to our educational quality of our educational system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. Ms. LaMantia, your response.
So no, we're not paying our teachers enough. The state made progress this past session, but it wasn't enough. In business, we need solutions that fit the scope of the problem, and that's not what we did. The state fell short. Some professionals got to choose whether or not they could work from home or go into work. Our teachers didn't have that choice. They had to go to campus. And when they did, the school districts weren't allowed to put in requirements that protected our teachers. And at the same time, many teachers required to teach in-person learning and remote students during those same classrooms. And that has a group of problems in and of itself. And the financial crunch our school districts were facing and our schools were facing, that was a shortage of teacher aides, which put on more administration and more paperwork on top of the teachers' already overloaded workload, and then got rid of their planning periods. So they had more work to do and less time to do it in without any additional pay or funding from the state level. We need to change the culture of politics to one that truly supports the roles of teachers and public schools and leaves politics at the Capitol. Because what we're seeing more and more of is the Capitol trying to tell our teachers what they can teach, when they can teach it, and micromanage in the classroom. We need to trust our teachers, we need to support our teachers, we need to pay them what they're worth, because without our teachers, we don't have a future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaMantia. Representative Dominguez, your response.
I was there and we didn't do enough. You know, back in the 86 session in 2019, the reason why we passed the historic House Bill 3 that brought in billions of tax dollars to help all of our public schools was because it was a top 10 priority of the governor. It was no such priority this last session. And that was evidence. Every single bill that we filed, every rider that we filed, they were ignored. It was not a legislative, nor was it a budget priority. The way we make things a budget priority is by hearing not just from educators, not just from parents. We need to hear it from business communities like this one. That resonates with both parties. And I'm not trying to blame any one party for the shortcomings of this last session. Clearly, we had a lot of things on our plate, compounded by a freezing ice storm right at the beginning of session as well. But I was there, and I'll tell you, we don't pay our teachers enough, but that's just the start. In November of last year, the American Federation of Teachers conducted a poll of 3,800 of its educators, and they found that 66% of them are considering leaving the profession. Now, regardless of what line of work you might be in, losing 2/3 of your workforce should be terrifying. Not just because of the money that you've invested in them, the time, but think about who's going to replace them. We might have educators with 10, 20, 30 years of experience bringing in a newcomer. Now, granted, these newcomers sometimes have tremendous energy, but that can't compensate for the loss of experience. So not only do we need to increase pay, we need to make the working life for them much better too. Imagine all those students that are terrified taking the end of the year test. Well, imagine how terrified those teachers are of having to prepare these students, and they're going to be evaluated based on the results. We need to not only pay them more, we need to improve their workplace situation so that they want to come back and teach. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Dominguez. Our next two questions relate to assessment and accountability. Texas administers a comprehensive high-stakes testing and accountability system that assigns an A through F grade to each campus and district, which can trigger sanctions that have closed schools and replaced elected school board members. Do you think STAR and end-of-course test are telling us everything we need to know about a student's ability to succeed in college and the workforce? We'll start with you, Mr. Torres. Your thoughts?
Learning for an adult or a child, particularly for a child, should be about enjoying knowledge. It should be about enjoying the process of interacting with other students, learning from that teacher who has that glow and wants kids to grow in their brain and their familiarity with how the world works. But you know what? These markers of how a school's doing, how a campus is doing, how a student is doing, instead they create tension, they create stress, they create anxiety. That should be a red flag. Is this the best way that we measure a child's progress? It isn't. A test, one of these exams that we're referring to, it's a measure of a point in time, how that student did on that day, at that time, with the circumstances that they were going through that day, with their household or whatever the case may be. It is not the most accurate measure of where a child is. It's a measure, but it should be one of many measures. The best measure is actually the teacher's input, who is looking at that student on a daily basis, seeing the growth projection and learning. You know, with your own kids, many times they struggle with math this month, but next month they don't. So it's more complicated than where are all the kids on this one particular day that they get STAR tested. So in my view, what I would do as a senator is I would reassess this entire weight that gets given to these STAR exams. Not to get rid of them, but to assess what kind of weight do we give in order to best measure how a student is progressing. I would put more weight on the input of the teacher as to how that student is progressing and how does that student need to get more advanced in whatever the subject matter is. That to me is more accurate, and quite frankly, professionally, it's probably going to do a better job of putting that student through the proper rigor that fits where they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. Ms. LaMantia, your thoughts?
I think the STAR test is just one of many assessments a teacher can use to identify the strengths and weaknesses of a student and adjust accordingly. But it's past time that we keep using the STAR as a punishment, as a stick for schools, and the perverse pressure it places on schools and teachers to teach the test needs to stop. In all other levels of academia, we see this use of standardized testing as only one factor, and not the sole factor and not the main factor that's used to assess a student and whether or not they have an ability to continue and be successful in college and the workplace. And so the fact that we see it in every other level of academia except for K through 12 is something that needs to be reanalyzed and relooked at, because K through 12 is one of the most important and pivotal times of the student's education. And we need to look at the whole student and not just their testing ability. And we need to reduce that pressure to teach to the test, because it reduces a teacher's ability to succeed and make sure every child has the ability and the chance of success. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaMantia. Representative Dominguez, your thoughts?
I'll be dating myself with this answer. I remember when we would take the California Achievement Test in elementary school, and we would spend a couple of hours the day before the test learning how to bubble in with a pencil and what an appropriate complete erasement of that bubble would be if you changed your mind. That's no longer the case. Those were the good old days. Now, children are terrified. Parents are terrified. Everybody's stressed out. I understand why we have end of course exams, why we have the STAR, because these are the strings that the federal government has tied to the funding that they provide our public schools, which shows us that our state government doesn't do enough to fund our Texas public schools. I'm not going to tell the government not to give us money. I'm not even going to suggest that we don't have some type of evaluation system, but we certainly need to have a separate system that divorces the idea of taking a snapshot of a student's achievement from the type of assessment we would give to the teacher of that student. Classrooms are different. I was a teacher myself, and I can tell you that third grade compared to the fifth grade, you're gonna have similar students, but with different priorities. Once they get into high school, oh good Lord, help every teacher out there. And I'll tell you, students have a lot of pressure, a lot of pressure. They're told that if they don't do well, they're not going to graduate. They're not going to go to the college of their choice. More importantly, the teachers themselves, knowing that they're going to be evaluated under the current system, makes them want to leave the profession. Who wants that kind of burden on them? What we need to do is keep an evaluative system. I don't think we need to be evaluating as many subjects as we currently do. We should be working with stakeholders, such as yourselves, the business community, higher education, vocational schools, to find out what are the true subjects that students need to master so that they can be functioning in our economy and they can get ahead in life. That's what we should be doing, and we should be working with our federal lawmakers as well.
And thank you, Representative Dominguez. Ms. Stapleton-Barrera, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I don't believe in the change in assessing these tests, right? I think that these tests have got to go. I don't think there's any benefit. I think what they're doing is that they're forcing the teachers to teach to the test. And we all hear that, well, I've got to get these kids to learn how to do this, teach the test, teach the test. We've got to be imaginative, right? We've got to be able to think outside the box, kind of go against the grain on some of these matters, and reimagine what education should look like. Why must we confine ourselves to these tests? We shouldn't have to. There are different programs and different models all around the world of teaching that are based on product, right? What can this group of students produce? What can they learn? Look at the projects, look at their involvement in the community. Let's get them out there. Let's do work study programs. Let's do hands-on sort of initiatives for these children. That's how kids learn. I'm a mom and I've got 3 kids, and I know that if I have their hands in the dirt, and we're talking about the dirt, then they're learning more than they are when they're trying to fill in a multiple choice question. So I think that we need to be bold, and I think we need to be brave, and I think we need to step outside the box, and we need to get away from these tests and see what it looks like. I think that we shouldn't be afraid of having to stick to these tests that we've had imposed upon us for so long. Those are my feelings on that.
And thank you, Ms. Stapleton-Barrera, thank you. Our current A through F accountability system is entirely based on STAR to rate our schools at the elementary and middle school levels. Should our accountability system be so dependent on a standardized test? Are there other factors to school quality we should consider? Ms. LaMantia, your thoughts?
Let's be clear, we don't all start in the same place. There's a study done that showed that middle income kids have access to about 13 books on average in their homes, whereas kids from lower income families have access to about 1 book per 300 kids. It's a stark disparity. Access to books, access to after-school activities, and access to pre-K, those are factors that are not considered when we take standardized tests. And those are factors that affect the results, the outcomes of those tests. Other studies have shown that lower income schools have fewer experienced teachers. They also have less parental involvement. And as we know, the benefit of parental outreach specialists in Title I schools is incredibly successful and can be very valuable. There's a big difference between a failing school and setting up a school to fail. We need assessment tools that measure both progress and the needs of the students and those classrooms. We need accountability, but we need to show our commitment to ensuring the success of every child. And that means looking at factors outside of just standardized testing. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. LaMantia. Representative Dominguez, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think. No worries. So I think the people that tend to look at accountability ratings often are people that are thinking about purchasing a home, because they'll look at it shows up on Zillow. You can see what the schools are ranked. And I'm not saying that's not important to know how good your schools are in the area. The question is, who determines what that ranking and accountability is? So when we look at accountability, we're taking a snapshot of how well students performed on certain tests at the end of the year. It doesn't tell us at all what the emotional well-being of those students has been like during this training period. It doesn't tell us what the extracurricular offerings are at that school. It doesn't tell us a whole bunch that needs to be evaluated. In the past 2 years, the accountability system has really been a hot topic. I am on a number of calls with the TEA where school districts were asking for waivers, or in many cases, a modification, because with the pandemic, a lot of students missed time. They missed classroom time. They were still required to be prepared for these end-of-course exams. That's terrifying. I'm not saying that we should not be evaluating our schools. I'm saying we should be adding more measures to that to give that potential real estate purchaser a better idea of what the schools are like in the area that they're thinking about moving into. And for those that already live there, having a true evaluation of how quality the education is at that school is key for those parents to be involved in those schools. I think parents sometimes are busy. They are not able to participate, but they want to. And I believe that this is clear for most communities. People want our schools to succeed. Nobody wants a D or an F school in their community. But having a better, realistic accountability system is what TEA and our stakeholders, such as yourselves, should all be a part of. And with your help, we can get there.
Thank you, Representative Dominguez. Ms. Stapleton-Barrera, your thoughts?
Yeah. It's like a double-edged sword, right? We're telling these teachers, hey, you have to do well on these things, and everyone has to get an A, or you're going to look bad. But we're not going to pay you the amount of money that is necessary for you to live a quality life yourself. So we're setting our teachers up for failure. I think that's clear, and we're setting our students up for failure. We've got these, we talk about school districts that are getting the teachers are getting $73,000 a year, right? And say our teachers are getting 40. How are they supposed to perform as well as other school districts that are treating their teachers better? If our teachers are going home and having to worry about, hey, can I keep my light on tonight? I'm not sure, because I don't know if I can pay the bill. If that's where our teacher's mind is at when they're going to school that next morning at 7 a.m., then how in the world can we expect them to do well and for their students to do well? It's like a culture of stress and confusion and failure. The major problem that this A through F system has is there's no E, right? What our E would be is evidence. There's zero evidence showing us that these A through F system actually works and actually makes the school system better. It's just not there. Look for it, you won't find it. There is zero evidence. So what we have is we've imposed these measures that are punitive, misleading, don't account for cultural diversity, and it's just teaching test preparation, and we're better than that.
Thank you, Ms. Stapleton-Barrera. Mr. Torres, your thoughts?
They're called intangibles. Those are the factors that sometimes you can't touch and feel, but those are the factors that can lead to or cause an environment not to be conducive for learning at home, in a neighborhood, in a colonia, wherever. And many times it's the intangibles of the child. What is their work ethic? What is their determination, tolerance level to stick with it because of where they come from, or because of being from a family that has two educated parents or perhaps one parent. Those are the intangibles that are not captured in scores of entire campuses. And there's other factors that are very disturbing, but we gotta put them on the table. It's not just about poverty. What kind of behavioral issues are the families contributing to by the parents or a relative? Let's say for drug use, okay? Is that child coming from a drug use family? I'll give you two statistics that should really shake you. The CDC says that 15% of all high school students reported having ever used illicit or injection drugs, cocaine, inhalants, heroin, methamphetamines, hallucinogens, ecstasy. Okay, 15% of our kids have reported using them or used them. Or 14% of our students have reported misusing prescription opioids. With that kind of environment, and those kinds of drugs don't know barriers of poverty or wealth, you've got to account for those factors. And our policymakers in Austin, when they designate proper ways to score how a campus is doing, have no interest in looking at those external factors. It makes it an inaccurate assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. At this time, I'm going to ask the audience to turn in their questions. You have a card, and Giovanni will pick those up. We want to make sure we get participation. And just pass them down to your left.
going to continue with questions. So if you have a question, just pass it down, and at the end, we'll do this.
And what we will do, we'll have questions at the end of the forum here. Okay, very well. And just to be reminded myself, we'll turn our mics off when we finish speaking. I forget myself as well, so that we don't get the feedback. Thank you very much. Our next set of questions is about school choice. During the upcoming 2023 legislative session, we would like to see a push for greater school choice initiatives, including state funding for private schools. Do you support or oppose vouchers, which are taxpayer-funded government subsidies for private schools and vendors with no accountability for results? How do you feel about the expansion of public charter schools in the state and or your community? Representative Dominguez, your thoughts?
Is for both questions?
Yes.
So there are some fantastic private schools out there, both religious, faith-based, and secular. And that being said, I would completely oppose any voucher going to a private school, period, full stop. I believe that that's merely a thinly veiled attack on our public schools and our public school students. That money should not be taken away from our public schools. In fact, what we should be doing is investing more money into our public schools. Secondly, as to charter schools, I firmly am opposed to the expansion of charter schools. There are some fantastic charter schools in the state of Texas, but there are also some very poor ones. And while they do tend to get closed down much faster than traditional ISDs, even 1 year of bad performance can really set students back quite a bit. And at the end of this, we still need to be looking at accountability. As to the first one, private schools are not accountable at all. They don't have to provide any assessment to the state to show that their students have learned anything whatsoever. And that's not good for those students. It's certainly not good for the parents that thought that taking their kids out of traditional ISDs or charter schools and putting them into a private school was a good idea. So what we should be doing is focusing on the good schools that we have now and trying to make all schools at that same level. Charter schools throughout the entire state need a lot more transparency, not just in what they're spending their money on, who they're spending it with, and where their schools are being allocated. I think that there's a great chance for our public schools to improve in the state if we devote the attention that they need. Sometimes competition can be good, and we've seen many public schools rise to the challenge when there's a great private school nearby or a great charter school nearby. But what we should be realizing is that every single public school in the state of Texas can be great if we give them the resources that they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Dominguez. Stapleton-Barrera, your thoughts?
I don't really like the term school choice, right? Because not everybody really has a choice. You have some kids that cannot choose to go to a public school or to a private school. Some children cannot choose to go to a charter school. So what it looks like, right, is we all pay our taxes and do what we have to do as citizens of our community. And part of that funds are going to these charter schools that are not inclusive, but they're exclusive, right? They can pick and choose who they want and who they don't want, and how they do it, I don't even want to know, right? What happens is they end up with a group of students that they want. That's not school choice. You know, if we have a little kid down the road that, you know, can't even afford shoes, and his public school funding is being allocated to kids that can choose new shoes, we don't really have school choice, do we? With that being said, I vehemently oppose all vouchers in any forms, including these tuition tax credits, opportunity scholarships, and these different terms that are kind of put out there to deceive, right? Because that's really not what they are. They're sort of blanket terms that make us think that there's one thing, but it's really not. I demand that charter schools need to be held to the same transparency, accountabilities, and worker rights standards as traditional public schools. I support a moratorium on charter schools, and I support the repeal of so-called district of innovation. That's one of those other terms that we really don't know what it means, and it's kind of tricky. legislation that allows districts to charterize their campuses. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Stapleton-Barrera. Mr. Torres, your thoughts?
You know, I'm so glad that my son, my firstborn, Joaquin, walked out of the room to do I don't know what, because I would embarrass him again, as I have done during this campaign. So I'm glad he's not listening to this, but he's our firstborn. And Yvette and I were so careful with this young man when we first had him, because he's our firstborn. And so we want to do everything absolutely perfectly. And that included putting him in a pre-K program here at St. Anthony at our school, at our local church here in Harlingen. We put him in St. Anthony because we wanted him in a protective environment. We wanted him to grow up with, at that tender age of 4, with Catholic virtues. And it was the best thing we could have done. And we paid for it. We budgeted every month so that we could send him there for a whole year. But you know what? I never expected to have it supported by a public source, because it should be a private choice. If you have the means and the ability for the resources to do that, you should celebrate and you should support those kinds of schools, as we do. You know, we tithe every Sunday and we contribute to the school, even though we don't have kids there. But it is the right thing to do so that our community has choices. But as far as taxpayer dollars to fund vouchers to attend the private schools, that is not a good policy. I would not support that. Charter schools. There's only one thing that I understand is very positive about charter schools. Well, there's probably others, but the one that I know more about is that they don't tolerate bad behavior. And they have a like iron fist about that. And they give you warnings, and then you don't follow the warnings, you're out of there. Maybe that's something we can incorporate in strategies for public schools. But selective admission of students, non-starter. That's not a good way of running an educational system. Also, watch out for those operators that want to open up new charter schools and they have no experience in education. Perhaps they've been detaining illegal immigrant kids and they have no business running charter schools. So I'd be very wary of new charter applications. And that's something I would review as your state senator.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. Ms. LaMantia, your thoughts?
I oppose vouchers. There are no blank checks in the private sector, and there shouldn't be any in the public sector either. We need to fully fund our schools, and when we do, we can incentivize innovation. From academies to magnets to early college preparations, we've seen public schools increase graduation rates. We've seen them break the cycle of intergenerational poverty, and we've seen them develop leaders. When it comes to charter schools, I have the same concerns. From the lack of accountability to cherry picking students to diverting needed funds from our public schools. It doesn't mean some charters have some successes, but we've seen a number of them close. Charters, they should exist and work within our public school districts, within those budgets, and not be positioned to compete for funds. And they should work under the same requirements as our public schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaMantia. Thank you. Our last set of questions is about school funding and state budgets. In 2021, the legislature maintained current funding levels for schools. In addition, schools received substantial federal support for learning lost, after-school programs and summer school programs, and other COVID-related funding needs, which will run out in 3 years. Have you talked to your school districts about what they are doing with their federal stimulus funds? And if so, what have you found out about how they are addressing learning loss? Stapleton-Barrera, your thoughts?
I've talked to a lot of teachers in the past few years, and they're certainly not seeing the money. I mean, we know that. I think that the teachers haven't seen a whole lot of change in their classrooms or in their pocketbooks, or none of that has trickled down as it should have to our educators or in their classrooms. We still know that teachers are having to pull out their wallets and buy supplies. They're having to work weekends when they're not necessarily supposed to. They're having to work late. They're having to do, they're having to go above and beyond much more than they signed up for when they entered this realm of education. So that we know. And, you know, we've got the 3 years stimulus, the time is ticking on that thing, right? We're in 21, so in 24, that will be depleted. And what that shows me is that what we do and how the state has been handling our teachers for many, many years is this. They recognize that teachers are upset, teachers are mad, so then they throw them a couple crumbs, right? They get this, the teachers are upset, they give them this extra check. They throw them a couple crumbs. Teachers are upset, okay, here's some stimulus money, throw them a couple crumbs. But it's kind of a slap in the face. I mean, if you look at it, what our leaders have been doing are trying to appease our teachers by giving them the bare minimum and hoping that it will silence them. But what we're seeing is our teachers are not silenced. They're speaking out more now than they ever have. So until someone makes a substantial leap and actually fights and gives them more than these mere crumbs, then they won't back down. And I'm proud to be part of that group, and I hope you all will be too.
And thank you, Ms. Stapleton-Barrera. Mr. Torres, your thoughts?
In response to this question, I communicated with the superintendent of Harlingen CISD, Dr. Niola, because that's where my kids go to school. And I received a very good summary of where these federal dollars were expended, and they were in 4 areas: investment in human capital, professional development, tools to assess student progress, and purchase of digital tools and technology. So it looks like it was a good effort to broaden the impact of these federal dollars. Again, not your taxpayer dollars from the local property taxes, but federal dollars that we all contributed to. So it's a good mix of where these federal dollars were expended. What I would do in order to further research this, if I get elected, I want to see exactly what impact it had on the teacher workforce at the Harlingen schools. I would want to survey the teachers. I would want them to know if this additional compensation was made to them during the school year. Was it a Band-Aid, or was a statement of, we want you here for the long haul? How did they see this investment in them through these federal dollars? So I would want to survey more how it affected professional staff, how it affected teachers. I want a post-review of this expenditure. You know, I have experience with federal policy from my past work, and I would want to see a post-report of how these federal dollars affected not just how many digital tools or new wiring did you do, or new laptops that everybody had to use during the shutdown, but I want to assess the attitudes, the level of enthusiasm of the teachers, the paraprofessionals, you know, the principals. I want to get a sense of, did these federal dollars make a true difference in helping them change their concern about the long-term tenure with the school district.
And thank you, Mr. Torres. Ms. LaMantia, your thoughts?
So I've spoken with a number of our school districts about these funds and what they've done, especially with learning loss. And one of the first things some of them did was they did an assessment to determine how best to spend those funds. They invested in human capital to teach and to lead, professional development specific to teaching, tools to assess student progress, and they purchased digital and technology to enhance their teaching and learning in this new environment. One of the things that I've also learned from learning loss is that each school district has put forth many different and implemented many different ideas to try to address that learning loss. And one of the most successful ones I've seen across the board is the individualized learning. So the school districts trust their teachers and allow them to make the assessments and make the decisions on which children need more attention to have that individualized learning and that extra time so that they can get caught up. It's when we trust our teachers and we have that individualized learning to be able to do that, that's when we start seeing success. And when we have successful programs, when our school districts find the right way to do things, we need to find a way to continue those programs. They shouldn't end just because federal stimulus money ends or runs out, and they shouldn't end just because the emergency of the pandemic is over. If we find new and innovative ways to teach that work and are successful, we need to find ways to fund them and keep them going. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaMantia. Representative Dominguez, your thoughts?
So my conversations with the superintendents in my legislative district began well before the last legislative session. And I think that's important for any senator to do, is reach out to every school district in their districts to find out what their needs are, what their assessments are, what their hopes are for the future, and how the state can best help them. In this specific case for this question, the bulk of these dollars that came to our schools actually came from the federal government. They didn't come from the state. So in many ways, my general philosophy is I do not like to micromanage school districts. I think as a House member, that's very difficult. As a senator, that's nearly impossible. And when we're looking at over 1,200 public schools in the state of Texas, combining traditional ISDs and charter schools, it's impossible for even a collective Senate to do. And that's not our purview. What is in our purview of what we can do is instruct those schools to be more transparent about how you're spending those dollars. As a senator, I would file legislation to require our schools to put on their webpage clearly indicating where these dollars are being spent. That's important, not just for the staff at these schools to know that this money is being used wisely to help them, but also for the parents and the students in the community to see what the values of that school board and that administration are. The reason this is important is because by showing transparency, that's when we get the good actors and the good actions that follow that. That being said, a number of the school districts in South Texas did a tremendous job with the ESSER funds and all the federal dollars coming their way. There are some schools that on occasion divert some funds that were going to go to a good program. Certainly we had some very good usage on technology, training, helping students catch up during that pandemic gap. But we did see some schools throughout the state of Texas unwisely use those funds for other things, perks, slight raises for administrators and staff, instead of going to the educators that are actually teaching your students.
Good. And thank you, Representative Dominguez. Our last question relates to assessment and accountability. The state will potentially have a budget surplus of $12 billion and another $12 billion available in the state's rainy day fund going into the next legislative session. Texas continues to be about $4,000 below the national average in per student spending. What are your funding priorities for public education next session? We'll begin with Mr. Torres. Your thoughts?
You know, the biggest source of funding, like this rainy day fund, which is $12 billion, it comes from what God gave Texas. Texas was given land, it was given natural resources, minerals, from which we derive all this wealth. And so, having said that, this fund should be expended on what the public needs, which in this case is catching up with investment in public education. There's no better way to invest a public source that God gave you than on the people that need it the most. The rainy day fund is intended to save for a rainy day. Well, it's the rainy day, it's still raining, with how teachers need pay increases, how they need more investment. What more do you want to know? You teachers have told you enough, legislators in Austin, that we need to invest more in them. So my priorities would be teacher pay scale adjustments to reflect post-pandemic realities of where the pay should be so that we're more competitive. I also, as a senator, will champion health and wellness investments in our school districts. That means healthier access to healthier food. We have here in the audience, for example, the owner of an all-natural farm here in Harlingen who would love to source food for our local school districts up and down the valley. But they're a smaller farm and they have to compete with bigger corporations that supply foods to school districts. So I would invest in a strategy to invest more in physical fitness activities, physical fitness joint projects with cities, so that kids have more incentives to do more physical fitness throughout the year. We shouldn't have to do it in a silo. Cities do this and the schools do this. We should partner with each other to leverage our resources. And we need to assess the changes in our local economies. If we're losing a lot of jobs in one field, that's going to affect the household incomes. And that's an assessment that I would be happy to sponsoring through legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. Ms. LaMantia, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'd like to start with raising teacher salaries and then follow it with staffing so teachers can teach. That includes mentoring for less experienced teachers, counselors, and teacher aides. Then I'd work with school leaders and educational leaders to find out what they need next, but also talk to our teachers that are in the classrooms every day, our principals that are in our schools, and our superintendents, because they have the best hands-on experience and the best handle of what is needed next. Well, we've all seen the research and we've seen the benefits of, universal pre-K, the need for parent support and outreach, the importance of social emotional learning, the impact of after-school activities, and continuing to narrow that digital divide. These are all programs that have shown success, but these are also programs that cost money. And these are efforts that we need to have funding and support for so that we can start seeing more successful students graduate and we can see our families grow and have strong South Texas families and economic activities.
Thank you, Ms. LaMantia. Representative Dominguez, your thoughts?
So, true story, during this last legislative session, we were told, don't dream too big. We only have so much money to give out, only so many billions in ARPA dollars. In June, after the session ended, the state comptroller found an extra $6 billion in sales revenue. It's an accounting trick, certainly, but it's a reality. We have plenty of money in the state of Texas. We have money sitting there. Much of it goes allocated to the rainy day fund. And like my colleague says, we need that money now. And I'll tell you where I would put it if I was sitting on Senate Finance. First, I would give it not just to teachers in a normal salary increase, but it would also be tied to an additional bonus for retention. The way that we fight those teachers that want to leave the profession is incentivize them to keep coming back, giving them additional money, not just on the usual salary ladder, but take care of them. Give them a real hard bonus for sticking around and helping our students. Second, I would also increase per student spending at our schools. I think that's incredibly important. We had so many schools that were terrified of attendance for these past 2 years because they knew their average daily allowance would be hurt. What they're paid by the state would be hurt. We need to start moving away from that model because, let's face it, sometimes kids are sick and they can't go to school. We shouldn't penalize the schools because of that. So we should start to move away from that model by providing additional funding for our schools. Thirdly, I would be improving all those school districts that need technological infrastructure. And what that means is not just laptops, not just broadband, but improving the physical classrooms and the school buildings. Quite a number of them are in need of repair, and it's not always the nicest thing to go build a brand new campus when you could fix what you have and make it safe. I would be doing this because we already have $10 billion available. We don't even have to dip into the rainy day fund. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Dominguez. Stapleton-Barrera, your thoughts?
Thank you. So the very, very first thing that we do is we match that $4,000 that we're skimping out on our students. I mean, if we're not giving per student $4,000 as compared to the rest of the nation, what does that tell our students? And what does that tell our teachers? I mean, it tells me that we're devalued. I mean, clearly, if there's a clear marker of how much we are valued, and if we could put a dollar sign next to it, this is it. That question is it. So we match that, if not exceed that, to show our students they are worth it. I mean, it's even sort of mind-boggling that we're still here. You know, how can we be shocked that Texas is always leading in the very bottom when it comes to quality of education amongst the other states. This is it. I mean, this is the answer right here. And especially here in South Texas, when we have specialized needs that the rest of the state and the rest of the country don't have, right? We have one of the highest poverty rates down here. We have a lot of specific health issues down here, and we had a lot of non-native English speakers, right? So to take this group of students that need extra funding because of our needs here in South Texas, and to cut them is shocking. So what do, right? We invest. We obviously pay our teachers. I've been harping on that. We get back to the basics too. Let's put some more money into our school libraries. Let's put more money into our arts and our sciences. Let's get back to the stuff that creates a well-rounded, happy, healthy kid.
And thank you, Ms. Stapleton-Barrera. Now, we have an opportunity for the audience to participate, and we have questions from the audience. And Giovanni?
Yeah, I just want to mention that because this is a public education forum, we're only asking questions about education, and because of time, we're only going to ask one. Okay. So we have a question.
Hi, good evening. As a longtime educator and campus administrator, proud product of public education, I'd like to first thank you for being here. It's really important to hear your views on public education. So my question tonight is concerning accelerated instruction. Schools are tackling more than ever after COVID. And last session, House Bill 4545 was passed, requiring an additional 30 hours of instruction for any student who did not meet certain standards on the STAR or ELC, the end of course exams. There was no funding attached to this program, and staffing and implementation is proving to be difficult for schools and teachers. What should the state do to help schools implement this new policy?
Do you want to read it?
I can use my teacher voice.
Okay.
We're good with the question?
So then, thank you so very much, Ms. Cruz. The question will go to LaMantia. What are your thoughts?
So my thoughts on this issue are pretty simple. If we either need to fund it or we need to repeal it. This is a complicated issue. It was HB 4545 was a very complicated bill, but what it comes down to, we need to make sure the funding is there to be able to implement those requirements. And if we don't have that funding, and if the state isn't willing to put that money up to fund these programs and these initiatives, then we need to repeal it.
Thank you, Ms. LaMantia. Representative Dominguez, your thoughts?
Yeah, as well-intentioned as 4545 was, it was actually not a bill that was filed at the beginning of the session. It was added later as calls came to TEA and the governor's office about how they can help encourage students and schools to help students catch up. Philosophically, I oppose every unfunded mandate. It's not right to be asking our schools and our teachers to be working extra hard without just compensation. More importantly, without the resources they need to help students catch up. It's not as if anybody asked for the COVID pandemic to happen. And that's why I'm opposed to it. But more importantly, I think we can work within the framework of the intention of 4545 and incorporate that into our educational system. And to do so, I will be filing a similar bill this next session to require the funding of 4545 to take place. I'm a big believer that we should encourage all of our students to get up to level. That's a good thing. I don't want any student to fall behind. I want to be clear about that. But I also want to make sure that this is not an undue burden on our schools, our school districts, and more importantly, our students who are trying to have a hard time making ends meet. I think part of what 4545 should be doing is providing additional resources in technology, in curriculum and learning materials for our schools, and guidance for our educators to meet that next level demand. And all of that requires investment in education by our state, and I support that.
And thank you, Representative Dominguez. Ms. Stapleton-Barrera, your thoughts?
I think that this bill is sort of a mess, right? I mean, it's beyond just the funding. What I've learned from the teachers is that it just doesn't work. What happens is that you have a child, there's like this 30-hour requirement. So the child, say the child needs more than 30 hours, just 30. Say the child needs less than 30 hours, what they gotta do at 30. Say the child just needs it in one specific area. It doesn't work that way. So it's not catered to an individual child. It's a very blanket program that they do for all of the students, and it's not working. And you know, if you talk to any teacher, they'll tell you that it's set for failure, and it's not providing students what they need to excel. What it's doing is sort of hindering them and forcing them to do stuff that may not be warranted or it's not enough. So I think it's gotta go. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stapleton-Barrera. Mr. Torres, your thoughts?
This bill, HB 4545, Representative Dominguez is correct. It was an unfunded mandate. It's a great way not to do legislation because it's so wasteful. Here you are passing legislation, but you put no money behind it. Then you send TEA, Texas Education Agency, to write up guidance, send it to all the school districts. You gotta be doing this under HB 45. The schools look at it and say, with what? You gave us no money to fulfill this extra instruction requirement. It's just it's not a good way of doing legislation. I would use it as a case study if I were to teach public policy of how not to do legislation. It's not the way to also send signals to your teachers and your administrators that Austin's got your back. I mean, why? Why give them through this false expectation that that the cavalry's coming and they're going to get this extra instruction requirement, and then they look and the cavalry has no weapons and no bullets. They just come in waving this new requirement from the state with no resources. So I would be happy to join my colleagues in passing legislation to fund this. If not, if the courage is not there to fund it, then to repeal it.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. We do not have time for additional audience questions, but those questions will be collected and shared with the candidates, so you'll have this information. And now we will move to closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to share any last thoughts with the audience. So let's begin with Ms. LaMantia. Your closing statements.
The economic activities that we see growing and that we need here in South Texas require an educated workforce. And I know we've spoken about it before, but I think it needs to be reiterated. Teacher burnout is real. Our teachers went above and beyond for us during the pandemic. They really went out and did whatever they could for our students. And it's time that we supported our teachers. We need to show them our gratitude and appreciation for all of their hard work. And it's not enough to say that during last session we took some steps forward, because we still haven't found and haven't put forth solutions that fit the scale of the problem. We have so much further to go. And education is an investment that lifts all boats. Education is an investment that pays. There is a clear return on that investment. And it's time that we made that investment. And that investment requires funding. That investment is also commitment from our communities to support and back up and appreciate and show our teachers our gratitude. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. LaMantia. Representative Dominguez.
You know, House Bill 4545 is an example of legislators trying to pass legislation without any expertise in the education field whatsoever. We had bills filed that mandated when school was going to start, and then another bill that said, but the school has to end before Memorial Day. And it seems every legislative session, public education is a punching bag of the state legislator. And the reason why that's the case is because it's not a legislative priority. If we want to have better bills being passed and enacted into law, send an educator to Austin. They're the ones that can speak with authority on the subject and can tell you the practical life of an educator, of an administrator, of a counselor, of a student. And that's important. Your businesses rely on quality students that are educated, can do at least basic math, they know how to use a cash register, they know how to communicate with customers on the phone, they know how to build houses, they know how to go to college and design rocket ships to go to Mars. The only way we're going to get there is by really making education a legislative priority. As your senator, this is one of my priorities. I taught for 3 years. Of the 9 other brothers and sisters, including myself, 7 of us have been educators. We believe in this because we believe in Texas public schools teaching Texas public students. As your senator, it would be my priority and a requirement by me, and I will hold myself accountable to every single constituent, regardless of party, to hold me to every single vote, to every piece of legislation that I file, showing that they're going to be tied to the educational success of your students, of your kids, of your grandkids, and of your neighbors. I hold myself out there, and if in any way I fail you, call me back. Thanks.
And thank you, Representative Dominguez. Ms. Stapleton-Barrera.
Thank you guys for having me here. I think we can all agree to some extent or another that when we look out there in the world around us, things could be better, right? We can tend to be under that mindset, well, things don't change down here and we're still behind and we don't get the resources we need. And I agree with that. And I think the reason is we've got to clean up our government, right? For so long, I have been sort of hesitant to fully put my faith in our public leaders and our government officials. And the reason is this: I think there will be no substantial change regarding healthcare or education or infrastructure, or anything that we need, until we clean up government, until we implement term limits, until we have transparency, until we're able to really figure out who is putting money in our leaders' pockets and where their money is going. I think once we can clean that up, then we can get some substantial work done and the world around us can change. But until then, we've got self-serving leaders that divert funds away from where they're needed. I plan to be a champion for education. I've been endorsed by the PSJA AFT because I think they recognize that I will be bold and I will fight and maybe say things that not everyone agrees with, but I will certainly be bold and a champion for our teachers. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Ms. Stapleton-Barrera. Mr. Torres.
Over the last several years, decades, which is quite shameful, public schools have gotten a bad rap. They have an image problem. There's this perception that public schools are inferior to charter schools and private schools. When we have so many star campuses in the district that we can point to and say, no, public schools know how to get the job done. But you know what? If we're going to reverse that public perception that public schools are somehow inferior, we better invest more in them. So that when companies come to Texas, they come not just because of tax breaks or other reasons, but because of the quality of schools. We should be bullish about pushing how our schools are going to make a difference in the lives of those families that come with those companies. The other strategy is going to be expanding partnerships between school districts and local institutions. If there's mental health issues going on in a campus, should there be a partnership with the medical school or with another institution or a primary practice that focuses on mental health? Those kind of partnerships need to be explored and supported by the state so that the schools aren't totally on their own and addressing social issues like that they face with the student population. If we want the kids to get less obese, eat healthier food, why not expand partnerships with local farms, with local providers of healthy food? And by the way, shacks. We authorize shacks that are these collaborative groups where parents get together with teachers or students and they come up with strategies to improve health on campuses, but they get no funding. They hardly ever meet. So they're more like a token type of effort to improve health on the campus. That's not the way to do good policy. And lastly, I'm going to ask each of you for your vote. And the reason for that is because you need to elect somebody who you can relate to. Somebody who has a life of overcoming obstacles, who has that down to find an obstacle, find a struggle, and find a way to overcome it. That's important in your representative as it is for teachers who are excellent at what they do. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Torres. Please join me in giving a big round of applause for our candidates. I want to thank you for coming to this forum to represent the Senate District 27. Your ideas, your passion meant a great deal to the audience. We appreciate you all so very much. And now let's welcome back Giovanna Escobedo. Raise your hand, Texas. Giovanna, give a big round of applause.
I also want to thank all the candidates for making the time to be here today. I know it's a little cold. I want to thank the audience for also making the time to be with us, and our online audience for also tuning in and watching the forum. I want to give a huge thank you to the Chamber of Commerce for helping us put on this event. We had a candidate forum on Tuesday, and then we did it again. So thank you so much for all the hard work and all the help that you gave us in putting this together. Will you join me in thanking you? And I want to remind everyone that early voting ends tomorrow. You have until 7 p.m. tomorrow. You can go to your local county elections office to look for the closest polling place, so you can go vote. If you don't have time to do it tomorrow, you still have time to do it Tuesday. Please go vote. Tell everyone to go vote. Lastly, there's still some sandwiches in the back. There's water, and we have yard signs that say I support public education and I vote. Feel free to take them. And cookies. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
What is